This is part 3 with Dr. Jawad Hashmi. Hope you have already watched or listened to part 1 and 2 with him. If you haven't, please do so. And also remember to subscribe to the channel. You can visit the website lightupwithShua.com. And also you can find the podcast on most of the social media. And please do let me know what you think. Leave a comment or two. And I would really appreciate it.
What I would say that in general, I think there are two sets of problems. One problem is how do Muslims who live in the West, how do they go forward? And then the other question, which I think is a bigger question, which we may not get into, but or we might, but that's how does the Muslim world, majority world, how do they go forward? So I think these are two separate questions. They're somewhat related. Yeah. I would say that for Muslims living in the West, I think it's important that we realize that it's an existential threat to our culture, social, and religious, like everything that matters to us. This is our very living here is an existential threat to it. Now that doesn't mean that move back. I'm not saying that.
Right. So how do you balance that? Yeah. How can you?
I do think that the first thing is that you acknowledge it. So you first, because I don't think most people are even aware of it. Exactly. That this is going to be a big deal. Yes. That there was one imam who was talking. He said that after one of his khutbahs, he met a woman who said, "I really liked your speech, and I'm thinking about learning more about Islam and converting to Islam." And so then he talked to her, and it ended up being that her last name was an Arabic last name, a Muslim-sounding last name. And then he asked her, "Oh, you have this Muslim-sounding last name?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm a third-generation Arab American, and my grandfather was Muslim." And yet now he met this woman, and she was indistinguishable from any average white person on the street. And she was actually interested in Islam, so it had come full circle. But the point is that that's the kind of threat level that I think we need to see. So that means we need to be thinking about this deeply. And I think some of the solutions definitely have to be, I'm big into institutions, so we need to build institutions. Yes. So even though when I was younger, Islamic schools were not maybe as good and they had their own sets of problems, and this may not be the solution, but this is just tentatively what I've been thinking about for my own imaginary kids right now, is I think I do want to make sure that I live in a place where there's a very good Islamic school. Even for their See, here's what I think about. The reason why atheism and lack of religion is so widespread in America, it's not because atheists have these great arguments and then they've debated with people and people. No, it's actually because we've expelled religion from every aspect of life, so that it's not something in traditional societies, religion was everywhere. It was in the fabric of your very society. In our Western culture, because of certain concepts, we exclude it from every aspect other than what you can do on Sunday. And even on Sunday, you're probably going to be too tired, and you're probably going to be like, why don't I just watch the football game on Sunday? All right. So if you're spending 40 hours as a child all the time, and there's no religion at all being discussed there, and in fact, many of the values that are being pushed are in many ways against religion or anti-religion, well, you shouldn't be surprised then when 1 in 4 American Muslims leave the faith now. This is a statistic. Yes. 1 in 4 American Muslims leave Islam. And again, it's not because impressive arguments have been raised against Islam. No, it's because irreligion is so common. So as one of the solutions, I do think that we need to build our Islamic schools. We need to bring those up to a high level. Now, we can't have them teaching kind of a fundamentalist kind of religion that we can't take seriously in the modern day. But we got to figure out how we can create such an institution that we teach kind of enlightened Islamic values to our young generation, so that those become second nature to them. So I think schools is one thing. I think as a parent, your job should be very active. And kids learn not just by listening, but with their eyes. So they see you and they say, what are my parents doing? Yeah. And when you're in your 20s, you kind of, or teenage and 20s, you kind of rebel against your parents. But by the time you're in your 30s, and there's a good Mark Twain quote about this. He said, when I was in I left my dad when I was 20, and I'm mixing it up, but he said, by the time I saw my dad when I was 30, I was surprised how much the old man had learned in 10 years.
Exactly. That's right.
We end up becoming just like our parents.
Yes.
And so I think as a parent, you have to take your responsibility very seriously. You need to be practicing your own faith. You need to be doing your prayers, going to the masjid, going to the mosque, being active when it comes to your religion, to your culture, being connected to it. And so just be very active in these things. Don't just think everything will be okay, because it really won't be. So those are the kind of things I can think about. And then also making sure that your children are studying. Either you're speaking a different language in the house so that they're bilingual, which is going to be very difficult because most of my generation's Urdu is garbage. And even mine, I mean,
So why do you think that is? Let me begin there because I have other questions regarding what you have been saying. So first is language. Why is your language not at home? Didn't your parents, now I will come to your parents now.
Sure, yes.
Didn't they speak with you Urdu?
They did speak with me Urdu. And but when I got to 12 years of age, I kind of rebelled and just said, I'm not going to speak back to you in Urdu.
So then they had to reply to you in English, or did they that kind of thing?
They continued to speak in Urdu and English, but as you live in a country, even your parents start speaking more English.
Of course, I understand. I have been through that, so I know very well. That's why I came to this question, because how I managed and what did I do? That's a separate story. That's why I want to know, what did you do as a child, as a young boy? So
my sisters speak much better, or they spoke much better Urdu than me because they didn't rebel like I did at 12 years old. For some reason, I just said, that's it. I don't have any more of Urdu. But what I'm very, very grateful is that my parents, my mother at a very young age made us, to this day, I still don't know why she did it, but she made us learn how to read Urdu. And even though we didn't
I have to meet your mother.
You should absolutely meet my
I would love to interview her also.
So we did spend I think 1 or 2 summers learning how to read Urdu, and it's just you wouldn't think that would be a big deal, but when I went back in university to read Urdu, all of that came back to me. So I had forgotten it, but it was still in the back of my mind, and now I'm able to easily read Urdu. So I'm grateful to that. So I do think it's important for our younger generation to speak more than one language, to not just poo-poo Urdu. That I think a lot of American Muslims say, well, what does Urdu have to do with Islam?
Exactly. Like having 2 languages is not a bad deal. I mean,
not at all. Okay. And I think by the time, my advice and what I'm going to try to do, but again, I'm just speaking of my imaginary
Sure.
I think by the time your children are done with high school, they should have been exposed to at least 3 to 4 languages. This is my opinion. So there should be English. You don't have to worry about. They're going to learn English, so don't worry about English. Urdu, if you're Pakistani, whatever your mother tongue, whatever it is.
That's what I would say.
You should try that. You speak that at home. Now, for me, that's easier because my wife speaks both English and Urdu fluently. So she can speak to them in Urdu, and so that.
What do you speak between?
We speak in English. We speak in English. Yeah. Only when we're outside and.
You don't want to. You don't want people to know what you're thinking.
Right.
Okay.
But exactly. So I benefit from that. But if you have grandparents, it's very good if you force the grandparents, even though they speak English, but to make sure that they speak Urdu to the kid. Now this is tough, but and kids at a very young age, they got very flexible minds. They can pick up on these languages like they can't do later on in life. So. And then what the very educated and rich, wealthy people in Europe and America do is they enroll their kids, and this is not possible for everyone because it's very costly, but they enroll their children into French or German elementary schools. Now, you don't have to do French or German, but the point is, I do think you should start to introduce another language that they may not learn to speak, but you can learn basic reading. So I think Arabic should be that language. So I think Arabic you should start teaching at a very young age. And then eventually I do think Persian is something that you can think about as well. But and then in high school, French, I think, or German is a good idea to learn.
So to covering the regions, and because if you're practicing Muslim, don't you think that we should have been taught from the day one, especially Arabic, because that's how we are going to be interacting with the Quran. So
absolutely,
why don't we start early on? Like if you're not an Arab,
right?
So
absolutely, and by not knowing Arabic, we're actually not only distancing ourselves from the religion, but we're also giving a monopoly to those who do specialize and read Arabic in madrasas where we may not agree with their ideas, and then they have a monopoly over that, and so we're alienating ourselves from that. So we absolutely should be learning Arabic, and we can start at a young age for that.
No,
and it just seeks how cultured of a person you are if you speak different languages, learn different languages. But in America, for some reason, it's not emphasized at all. It's speak American.
Still, I mean, I am surprised. It's not still, I mean, the maximum it is you can take French, and usually people don't know. They forget about the language they took in the high school. 4 years I took French.
Yes.
They can't speak a single word out.
Right.
That's what happens.
Okay. I took Spanish, and I can...
Spanish is actually...
a little bit, but speaking is not that great.
No.
At all.
Maybe your profession would require, wouldn't, like the being a doctor, I think. Do you use Spanish?
Sometimes I do use Spanish. But actually, interestingly, I wish I had studied French, because if you want to do a PhD in America, which I strongly recommend more Muslims to do.
We'll come on that briefly.
French but just on the languages thing, French and German is very useful.
I'm a proponent of languages. We should teach, especially if you speak, if you are from somewhere that you have a native language, even if you're second or third generation, you can keep it. You can continue to have that language. Languages expand your neurons and, all the brain science that we have learned today. It's always good to know 2 to 3 languages. So it doesn't hurt in any form or shape. So I'm very happy that I'm on the same page with you on these topics. I don't know where we will disagree, but let's see.
We'll try to find something.
Let's find something. Okay, so what is it like to study Islam in a Western university?
So that's a great question, and I think if you're interested in studying Islam in any professional capacity, the question that arises to one is, should I study? To put it bluntly, should I study at Harvard or should I study at Al-Azhar? That is the kind of question. That's the kind of question that I had, actually.
Actually, yes, that's a very important question, because please address it. There are a few people who have been thinking about it. Like, what do you do?
Right. Yeah, so this is the question that I faced. I think that there are benefits of both approaches. I think the problem is, if you study Islam in a traditional setting, like Al-Azhar University or Saudi Arabia or some other place of the Arab world, or even a Pakistani or Indian madrasa system, there are definitely a lot of benefits to that. But I think you run a lot of risks as well, especially the younger you go and the more kind of impressionable you are. And if you end up spending what amounts to half a decade or a decade of your life in that environment, it will inevitably have its effect on you. And that may or may not be a positive effect. So really the way the system is set up there is on it's a pre-selective process. So actually at one point in time, I did apply to a very conservative Islamic institution in Saudi Arabia. And even though I was able to get into all of these elite universities in the West, I got rejected from this university. And I was told by somebody that the reason was they did not want somebody who had developed at this point. They wanted somebody they actually prefer people who just graduated high school, even people who had just come to Islam, even been in prison before, people who had very little else to go on, and then they can start their brainwashing process. So I think it's very hard to study Islam in a traditional setting if you want to have complete freedom of your mind. And so I decided to study in the Western University. Ultimately, and it might be a bias because now I've done it, I think it has some advantages. some disadvantages, but many advantages. And the advantage, I think, is that critical aspect of where you can get taught something and then you could say, wait, this is a problem. I don't agree with this. Or
the ability to question.
Exactly, the ability to question. And so ultimately, though, I think we do need to create our own institutions where we can teach kind of academic theology, which is a combination of this traditional Islamic learning with this Western critical approach as well. And I think there's maybe in some places where they're thinking about doing this or doing this. But so as far as studying as a Muslim in the Western Academy, it's a challenge, but I think there's a promise, and I enjoy it. So
maybe you can suggest, because I'm not sure if many people want their children to be a professor, right? So I think if you can talk about that, because okay, so what do you really need to become a professor in the West as a Muslim scholar? What does it inculcate? What's your qualification? I mean, I can't, or not me, but somebody else can go through your path, Jawad. You have been an MD and, all these things that you have done. Not everybody can do that. And it's time and money and it's a lot. So,
well, what I would say is that, first,
thank you for watching or listening to part 3 with Jawad Hashmi. I hope you can stay tuned for the next episode with him next week. And please remember to subscribe, Light Up with Shua, and you can visit my website, lightupwithshua.com, and let me know what you think. Do you like this series with Jawad? And you can find more upcoming programs and collaborations. And let me know what you think of the whole podcast. So, see you next week. Thank you.